In the summer of 1944, Camp Ruston, Louisiana, smelled of pine, diesel, and distant freedom. Behind barbed wire and magnolia trees, hundreds of German engineers, once men of status in the Wehrmacht, were now prisoners, fed and watched by a nation they had been told was crude and chaotic. On their first morning, the mess hall offered them a spread they had never seen, a thick, amber paste glistening under the southern light. Oberingenieur Ernst Becker, a 36-year-old from Munich who had designed fuel systems for the Luftwaffe, scooped a spoonful, sniffed, and muttered, "The cheap smell of American soldiers." His companions laughed quietly, but when a nearby U.S. officer, Major Leonard Hayes of the Army Corps of Engineers, dipped into the same jar and smeared the paste on white bread beside a polished Jeep, Becker's laughter stopped. The gesture was ordinary, but the message was devastating. In Germany, rank dictated rations. Here, even officers ate like privates. The paste was peanut butter. It carried more calories per ounce than most field rations of the Reich, rich in fat, protein, and something harder to name, equality. One jar contained enough energy to feed a soldier through a day's march. In 1944, America produced over 200 million pounds of it, not as luxury, but as staple. Every child, worker, and GI shared the same taste. Becker stared at his spoon as though it reflected a world turned upside down. Around him, the camp was alive with contradictions. American guards traded jokes through the fence, country music hummed from a radio, and prisoners built wooden models of planes to pass time. One night, a guard offered a spoonful of peanut butter in exchange for a hand-carved chess piece. It became an unspoken currency, one pawn for a taste of abundance. A week later, Becker received a package of magazines used for language lessons. Between the pages of Life magazine, he saw color photographs of American kitchens, chrome toasters, electric mixers, families smiling over breakfast. He realized that the same industrial precision he once worshipped in Messerschmitt aircraft was applied here to comfort, not conquest. A peanut had been turned into a system, an equation of calories and machinery that fed millions. Germany engineered fear. America engineered lunch. In his notebook, preserved later in the archives of the Bundesarchiv, Becker wrote, "The Americans build their strength from softness. They design peace as efficiently as we design war." That night, as crickets sang and the camp generator hummed, he lay awake. The spoon that had once felt like mockery now felt like prophecy. The taste of oil and sweetness lingered, unsettling him more than defeat itself. The next morning, a group of engineers dissected an American Jeep for study. Becker watched how every part fit logically, repairable by any mechanic, not just specialists. He whispered, "They build machines the way they spread butter, smooth, consistent, for everyone." No one answered. Pride, once their rations, was running out. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. Tell us where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. The camera fades on Becker's spoon, resting on an empty tin. Somewhere beyond the fence, the camp kitchen whirs again, turning peanuts into the quiet revolution of modernity. Autumn 1944 brought cooler air to the plains of Texas, where the German engineers from Louisiana were transferred to Camp Hearne. The camp was massive, nearly 5,000 prisoners, rows of barracks flanked by cotton fields, guarded water towers gleaming in the sun. For the Americans, food was not just sustenance, but morale. For the prisoners, it was revelation. Every tin, every wrapper, every can bore the same mysterious code words: protein, vitamin, calories. They sounded more like mathematics than cooking. Oberingenieur Karl Weber, 34, who once worked in Hamburg designing precision gears, asked the American sergeant distributing rations, "Why do you measure food like ammunition?" The sergeant grinned. "Because, pal, hunger's a weapon too." That evening, under the camp's fluorescent lights, Weber studied the ration labels. A standard GI received about 3,900 calories per day. Meat, bread, vegetables, peanut butter, and fruit. It was calculated, predictable, scientific. In Germany, rations had fallen below 800 calories for civilians by that same year, and the winter to come would bring even less. Weber realized that here, food was a system, not charity. In the canteen, another engineer, Franz Keller, marveled at powdered milk distributed to the prisoners. "Even their milk is industrial," he said. Weber replied softly, yes, and therefore eternal. He wrote that night in his diary, "We built rockets. They built breakfast." One afternoon, American guards invited the prisoners to help unload a shipment of Red Cross parcels. Inside each box lay the logic of abundance: cheese from Wisconsin, raisins from California, canned meat from Chicago, biscuits from New Jersey, and small jars of peanut butter from Alabama. It was the geography of plenty, mapped through taste. The camp doctor, Captain Raymond Holt, explained the philosophy behind it. Every man needs strength, whether soldier or farmer. Nutrition keeps the machine running. It wasn't metaphor. In 1943, the U.S. Department of Agriculture had established the first official Food for Freedom charts, ensuring that even civilians contributed to the war by staying healthy. America had turned diet into defense. A rumor spread in the barracks that President Roosevelt had personally ordered the nation's nutrition plan after learning German workers were collapsing from malnutrition. The rumor was false, but the idea stuck. In whispers, prisoners admitted admiration for the simplicity of it, a government that counted calories as carefully as bullets. Weber wrote another note in his margin. In Germany, nourishment is the mother's duty. Here, it is the nation's honor. One evening, lightning flashed across the Texas sky, and the men gathered around a table built from scrapwood. They spread peanut butter on plain bread and stared at the small jars. No hierarchy, no officers, no workers, just men fed equally. It was the first time some of them had eaten without rank determining their portion. As the storm rumbled beyond the fence, a hush fell over the barracks. For once, silence was not fear. It was digestion, both literal and moral. The next morning, Keller said quietly, "Perhaps America wins, not because it fights better, but because it feeds better." Weber did not answer, but when the sergeant came with new rations, he counted every label with the precision of a man weighing ideas, not food. Outside, trains rumbled east, loaded with corn, beans, and grain for Europe's starving zones. The prisoners didn't know it yet, but some of those same wagons would carry post-war relief marked "Made in the USA." A new understanding had begun to spread, one that filled the stomach first, then the mind. By November 1944, the German engineers had learned to expect abundance: white bread, canned fruit, even coffee. But what truly haunted them was the quiet order behind it. One afternoon, Karl Weber sat under the camp's laundry shed, watching rows of peanut butter jars stacked like artillery shells. Each identical, each perfect. A single machine could fill 120 jars per minute. He thought of his childhood in the 1930s, of queues in Hamburg when flour was rationed, of his mother baking black bread mixed with sawdust to stretch the dough. Hunger had been the constant hum of German life. Now, in captivity, Weber realized that America had weaponized the opposite: plenty. The Americans didn't fear hunger, they managed it. He learned that the U.S. Department of Agriculture had been issuing national nutrition guides since 1941, predicting the calorie needs of an army before the war even began. It was not improvisation, it was design. At night, the barracks smelled faintly of roasted peanuts and machine oil. Becker, the older engineer, mused, "We built rockets that could cross the channel. They built sandwiches that could cross oceans." It wasn't a joke. Cargo ships under the Liberty program carried not only munitions, but food, powdered eggs, peanut butter, and canned milk, to Allied troops and civilians alike. Each Liberty ship could haul 10,000 tons of supplies. Efficiency fed victory. One Sunday, the prisoners were allowed to help repair farm equipment for nearby towns. Weber noticed how the tractors were simple, almost rustic, yet built to last. Farmers fed the front as surely as soldiers did. The war economy of the United States was circular. Every calorie, every gallon of fuel, every bolt served both production and people. Germany's was linear, from the worker's hand to the battlefield, and no return. That night, Weber wrote in his small notebook, "We trained men to endure hunger. They trained machines to eliminate it." In the barracks, someone told a rumor that back home, the winter would be desperate. Bread lines, bombed bakeries, and no heating oil. The men fell silent. For the first time, victory seemed less about weapons than about warmth. One prisoner, Keller, began sketching the peanut butter factory he had seen in an American magazine. Conveyors, pressure pumps, filters. He explained to others how the paste was produced by physics, not cooking. crushed by rollers until every cell broke, releasing natural oil that preserved itself. "It is the same principle we used in bearings," he said, "but here it feeds children." The guards listened quietly. They respected these men, polite, disciplined, curious. Once, an American mechanic handed Weber a jar and said, "Take it. You'll need it when you go home." Weber smiled, but didn't open it. He kept it on his bunk like a trophy, or a question. By December, camp newsletters circulated small essays by the prisoners, translated by American teachers. One sentence stood out: "The land that feeds well fights with patience." The editor didn't know which German wrote it. Perhaps that was the point. In a world divided by flags, they had begun to speak one language, the language of function, of sufficiency, of survival without cruelty. Outside, freight trains whistled under the Texas moon, hauling food toward the front. Each car, a heartbeat of an empire built not on fear, but on fuel. For the body, for the future. In January 1945, a select group of German engineers from several POW camps was granted permission to tour U.S. industrial plants under military supervision. It was part of the Technical Orientation Program, designed to expose them to American production methods. Among them was Karl Weber, his curiosity sharpened by months of quiet reflection. Their train passed through endless plains and cities wrapped in snow until they reached Chicago, the heart of meat, metal, and motion. The Swift & Company plant on West 39th Street was an empire of efficiency. Smoke rose from the stacks like clockwork. Inside, thousands of workers, men and women alike, moved in rhythm, grinders humming, conveyors rolling, pressure valves hissing. To Weber's astonishment, the process of making peanut butter followed the same mechanical choreography as aircraft manufacturing. Roasted peanuts entered a hopper, passed through steel rollers, were heated, filtered, blended, sealed, and labeled, all within 12 minutes. Not a human hand touched the paste. Standing beside him, Lieutenant Harold Mason, their escort, remarked, "Gentlemen, this is how we feed 10 million soldiers without breaking a sweat." The word struck Weber harder than any weapon. In Germany, food was still an art, brewed, baked, and fermented through centuries of culture. Here, food was an equation, calculated for durability and precision. America had not industrialized hunger. It had abolished it through machinery. Another German, Becker, murmured, "This is not cooking, it's design." The factory foreman overheard and smiled. "Exactly," he said. "We design flavor like you design airplanes." The remark lingered. For men who once worshipped the precision of Messerschmitt and Siemens, it was humbling to see that same genius applied to lunch. In a small viewing room, they were shown graphs of national output. Between 1942 and 1944, the United States had increased food production by 40% while sending supplies to every Allied front. No other warring nation had achieved that. It wasn't luck. It was logistics. Weber watched film reels showing women in overalls inspecting peanut butter jars, each labeled with batch codes and nutrition data. Behind every label was a philosophy. If something could be measured, it could be improved. During lunch at the factory cafeteria, an American technician shared his meal with them: meatloaf, bread, and again, peanut butter. When Becker asked why Americans ate the same thing so often, the man laughed. Because it works. The simplicity was disarming. Efficiency, Weber realized, wasn't just about machines. It was about trust. Trust that the system would provide. Trust that sameness could be strength. On the train back to camp, the Germans debated quietly. Keller insisted that such uniformity killed culture. Weber disagreed. "No," he said, "it frees people from fear. It gives them time to think." That night, under the camp's dim bulb, he wrote another line in his diary. "They design comfort as we design conquest." A week later, an American guard showed them a small newspaper clipping. The Allied armies had crossed the Rhine. Germany was cracking. The engineers stared at the headline, then at the jar of peanut butter on their table. It wasn't just a spread anymore. It was proof of a civilization that engineered not power, but permanence. In the quiet that followed, Becker whispered, "Perhaps the war was lost the day they learned to feed millions the same meal." And no one complained. The lights flickered, the machines of Chicago hummed through the night, and for the first time, the Germans understood. Modernity wasn't in the weapons they built, but in the kitchens they ignored. Spring 1945 crept into Texas with magnolia blooms and rumors of Germany's collapse. The camp felt different, lighter somehow. Guards played harmonicas after night shift. Prisoners painted the fences, and shipments from the Red Cross arrived weekly, filled with coffee, soap, and more of that thick American paste. The engineers had stopped laughing at it. Some even asked for extra jars to trade for pencils or tobacco. Peanut butter had gone from curiosity to comfort, and with it came a subtle erosion of the walls between captor and captive. One hot afternoon, during parcel distribution, a jar rolled from a crate and burst open in the dirt. A black American soldier named Corporal James Whitmore stooped to clean it up. Becker, the senior German engineer, bent down too, instinctively helping. For a moment, both men's hands were covered in the same golden smear. Whitmore chuckled. "Guess we're in the same mess now, huh?" The Germans expected arrogance, but none came. Instead, the corporal pulled another jar from the crate, split it open, and shared it. He told them quietly that he'd grown up in Georgia, that his father had never been allowed to sit at the same diner counter as a white man. "But out here," Whitmore said, tapping the jar, "we all get the same rations. Everybody deserves to eat." The Germans fell silent. In their world, equality was theoretical. Here, it was edible. That night, in Barrack 12, they argued again. Keller insisted the American soldier's speech was propaganda. "He fights for people who still despise him," he said. Weber disagreed. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe he fights because he wants the idea to win, not the people." The debate grew heated, then faded into quiet chewing, the rhythm of thought replacing words. Weber began writing letters again, this time less about machines and more about humanity. In one, smuggled through a Red Cross volunteer, he wrote to his wife, "They have contradictions too, but theirs feed the hungry, not the cruel." Over the weeks, Becker noticed something strange. Laughter returning to the mess hall, men trading recipes for ways to mix peanut butter with jam or honey from the camp's kitchen. In small acts of creativity, they rediscovered dignity. It was no longer the food of the enemy. It had become a small symbol of peace, a flavor beyond ideology. At the same time, news drifted in. The Allies had liberated Buchenwald. Photographs reached the camp, skeletal survivors, hollow eyes, ruins of moral engineering. The images broke them. That night, Becker whispered, "We built a nation on obedience. They built one on appetite." No one answered. The next morning, Whitmore passed their barrack again, handing out leftover crackers. Becker stopped him. "Corporal," he said softly, "if I may ask, why do you still smile?" Whitmore grinned. "Because hate don't feed you, sir." Becker stared at him speechless. Then in a gesture no one expected, he tore the last piece of his bread and shared it. Two men, one prisoner, one guard, eating from the same jar, under the same sun, in a world still divided, but momentarily human. As evening fell, the camp loudspeaker played jazz from a nearby base. Becker wrote in his journal, "Peanut butter is not food. It is proof that a simple thing can survive hatred." And to you watching now, would you have shared that spoon or walked away? Tell me in the comments, because history was not made by leaders alone, but by small mercies passed hand to hand. By April 1945, the war in Europe was collapsing. The prisoners at Camp Hearne lived in a strange limbo. The world they'd served was dying, yet their daily life continued with clockwork precision. Breakfast at 6, roll call at 7, work assignments until noon. But beneath the calm, minds were shifting. Carl Weber sat at a wooden desk near the barrack window, the Texas wind fluttering a half-written letter. It was addressed to his wife, Liesel, in Hamburg. The letter could never be sent officially. Censorship forbade personal reflection. But he wrote it anyway, hiding the pages in a hollowed dictionary. "My dearest Liesel," it began, "I used to think power was measured in tanks and discipline. But here, I see another kind. These people build trust into their machines. They eat the same food whether rich or poor. Even the colonel's lunch tastes like the private's." He had learned that an American factory worker earned enough to buy the very product he helped produce, a truth that stunned him. In Germany, the builder rarely owned the machine. In America, the builder was the market. It was a closed circle, an ecosystem of dignity. Weber compared pay stubs he had seen in a discarded magazine. An assembly worker at Boeing earned $1.20 an hour, enough to feed a family of 4. In Germany, his peers at Junkers barely afforded meat twice a month. In the evenings, Weber and Becker met by the fence to watch the trains. Boxcars carried flour, sugar, and powdered milk, freight for a continent already starving. "They're preparing for the peace before the war even ends," Becker murmured. Weber nodded. "They've industrialized foresight." Rumor spread that one of the guards, Sergeant Cole, was collecting prisoners' essays to send to Washington as part of a psychological study. When Weber heard this, he rewrote his letter, this time as an essay, hoping it would survive. He added one line that would echo decades later. "A nation's greatness is not what it destroys, but what it mass produces for mercy." Weeks later, after the camp library opened for volunteers, an American historian named Charles Mason discovered Weber's essay and quietly copied it before mailing the papers to an archive in Austin. Decades later, that same note would resurface in a Smithsonian exhibit titled "Peanut Butter, Power, and Peace." But back in 1945, Weber knew none of that. He only knew that he was no longer the man who had entered the camp. He spent evenings helping the guards repair typewriters, sometimes sneaking English words into his letters. Modernity, comfort, trust. Simple words, but each carried a revolution inside. One afternoon, Becker found him staring at the open jar of peanut butter on the windowsill. "You still write?" Becker asked. "Yes," Weber said. "It helps me remember that thought is also a kind of engineering." Outside, the radio crackled with the voice of President Truman announcing Roosevelt's death. The camp fell silent. For the Germans, it was a shock. Even the enemy mourned a leader. Weber whispered, "They change presidents without changing peace. We change generals and destroy everything." That night, he added a postscript to his secret letter. "If this jar reaches you, Liesel, know that it smells not of victory, but of order, of a world where machines serve the human heart." To you watching, could you write such a letter if your world had collapsed? Would you confess admiration for the enemy who fed you? Let me know what you think, because history is only real when it's answered by the living. May 8th, 1945, the day Germany surrendered. In Texas, the camp siren wailed at dawn, not for alarm, but announcement. The guards shouted the news, the prisoners froze. Some wept, others stared at the dirt. The world they had served, the Reich of order and iron, had ended thousands of miles away, but its shadow lingered even under the bright American sun. For hours, silence reigned. Then Becker, the elder engineer, walked toward the fence, jar of peanut butter in hand. It was half empty, the last one from their final Red Cross shipment. The paste had hardened under the heat. He sat beneath a cottonwood tree and turned the jar in his hands as if reading a map. The label had faded, but the word "smooth" was still visible. He thought of all he had seen. The machines in Chicago, the balanced rations, the factory girls with laughter in their eyes. America had built a civilization on something Germany had forgotten, the idea that comfort was not corruption. He unscrewed the lid and stared into the pale brown surface. "We used to think modernity meant faster planes," he murmured, "but maybe it just means this: food that never spoils, systems that never sleep." Nearby, Weber sketched the camp for the last time: fences, barracks, the tin roofs gleaming in the noon light. "It's strange," he said. "I came here as an engineer, and I leave as a student." Becker smiled faintly. "Then you've learned the only lesson that matters. Progress is not invention. It is empathy measured in steel." That night, the camp floodlights flickered on. Beyond the wire, frogs sang along the riverbank, and from the guardhouse came the distant hum of a generator, a soft, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. The prisoners gathered quietly for their final roll call. Some would soon return to a ruined Germany. Others would stay to rebuild Europe's machines. But all of them knew something irreversible had happened. Becker held the jar one last time and whispered, "We were taught that purity was strength, but they mixed everything, races, foods, ideas, and somehow became stronger." His voice trembled. "Maybe the future belongs to those who are willing to blend." He dug a small hole beneath the tree and buried the empty jar. It was not a surrender, but a tribute to a civilization that had beaten them not through fear, but through design, through the quiet logic of feeding the many. A guard watching from a distance saw the gesture and asked softly, "What are you doing, sir?" Becker replied, "Just leaving behind what I've learned. that modernity spreads like this paste, from hand to hand, until no one remembers who opened it first. The next morning, the train stood ready to take them east. The engineers climbed aboard with their meager belongings, a few sketches, a ration tin, a folded flag. As the whistle blew, Becker looked out one last time at the cottonwood tree. A breeze rustled its leaves, and for a fleeting moment, he imagined the buried jar glowing under the soil, like a seed. When the train moved, Weber whispered, "We are leaving behind the future." Becker smiled, eyes wet. "No, my friend. We are only catching up to it." Outside, dawn spread across the prairie, golden as the spread they had once mocked, now forever the taste of modernity. When the trains left Camp Hearne, the dust they raised seemed to settle not just on the tracks, but on an entire era. The war that had consumed continents ended quietly among men who once believed that victory was born from precision and control. Yet what humbled them was not defeat by superior weapons, but by the ordinary, by jars, machines, and meals that revealed how a nation's power could lie in the comfort of its people. For Karl Weber and Ernst Becker, the journey through captivity became an education in civilization. They came to understand that modernity was not the roar of engines, but the hum of systems that served everyone, from the factory worker to the general. In those months of observation, they saw how a spoon of peanut butter could carry ideas of equality, how a production line could become a statement of faith in human worth. Years later, when Weber returned to Hamburg, he built small machines for civilian kitchens, grinders for bread, mixers for dough, and he told his apprentices, "Remember, the best designs are the ones that feed someone." Becker died in 1958, still keeping a faded label from an American ration tin in his desk drawer. History often remembers wars through battles and treaties, but the quiet revolutions, the ones stirred by taste, by compassion, by curiosity, outlast empires. Somewhere in Texas soil, beneath a cottonwood tree, lies an empty peanut butter jar, its metal softened by time. Perhaps, if you stood there now, you'd still feel what Becker felt that night, a sense that modernity is not about dominance, but about the ability to make the smallest thing shared by all.